Welcome, Valiant Warriors. It is episode 11 of Valiant Watch. We have a very special edition for you. We're going to be talking about one of the biggest Valiant events. Very significant, I think, to a lot of people who are Valiant fans on a personal level. We're going to be talking about, of course, the Valiant issues 1 through 4, all things about it, and just really just digging into it and bringing it back for those of you who read it when it first was out, and you obviously are already on board, and then just refreshing people if you've heard of it but you never read it. Here's some reasons why you should.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. I mean, this is like the book to dive into for Valiant, right?
yeah, exactly. It's one of those things where pretty much everything from Valiant is really new reader friendly, but the way the Valiant, let's just get right into this. So like the way the Valiant goes into it, it's like a great glance across the entire landscape. Like the name is so appropriate, because even with like some of the ancillary characters in the story, like Quantum and Woody and whatnot, you're like, yeah, you don't get a ton of them. You just see him like fighting in the background and that kind of stuff. See him get a couple shots in on the immortal enemy and this sort of thing. But you still get like a vibe for like, okay, like what are those dudes about? Why is there a goat with laser beam eyes? Like, there's even like the background of it is just pretty crazy. I guess first we should just kind of just break down the story a little bit for those who might be unfamiliar. So the Valiant, and catch me if I miss anything, it basically is a story of Galad, the Eternal Warrior, and the Geomancer. So, for every plus, there's a minus. For the Geomancer, there's who's, the physical embodiment, like the spirit of the earth, kind of like Doctor Strange, but earth-based, right? So you got to have the reverse, which is the immortal enemy. Think of them kind of like Black Hand, like if you've ever read Darkest Night, think of him like Black Hand, except less human, if that's even possible. So it gets right into it, and you see the history of conflict between Galen and the former Geomancers, and it just sets up that there's just this bloody conflict that the three parties are just locked in, and it just brings you right from his history of his first real battle with the immortal enemy all the way up to the modern day of the Valiant universe, and how now he's going to tackle it with Ninjak and Exo-Man of War and Bloodshot and all these other guys that weren't around before, how it'll make a difference this time going against the immortal enemy. So that's more or less the vibe.
I think that it kind of sets up the Eternal Warrior versus the immortal enemy, and I think that's like the lens that this book kind of kicks the story off. But it does start with a historical element. I mean, you go through time and see the Eternal Warrior in this basically eternal struggle. And I think that's like a great way that this book just introduces, the Eternal Warrior and Galad.
Yeah. And one of the things I like about it is, for the longest time, Galad, he's got the 3 scars on his face, and yeah, it's awesome looking and everything. And you just assume that he got it in a fight, but you never really knew how. And this book, just right in the beginning, is like boom, boom, boom. This is how serious it is. Each mark is a failure from a time he couldn't stop the immortal enemy, and it tugs on your heartstrings, man. Especially that last one. That last one, it'll get you.
I think, like, before we get too deep into it, there's something I loved in this book. In the first few pages, I'll show everybody here. It gives you an introduction into all of these characters. So before you even start the story, it gives you a brief overview of the Eternal Warrior, the Geomancer, Bloodshot, Armstrong, Neville Alcott, Exo, Ninjak, like all of these characters. It gives you a rundown. Like, no book does that, really. Like, it's just introducing all of these characters, and that's before anything even happens.
Yeah, and one thing I like about this is they included Colonel Capshaw, who's like one of my low-key favorites, because she's like a much more likable Maria Hill, So
and I believe, isn't she the one who shows up in Psylords?
Yep, she was actually the one that set off that whole thing that led to the events of Psylords, and she pops up a lot in Exo-Man of War. in the Matt Kent run when he comes back to Earth after all of his space shenanigans and whatnot. So she's a low key character, but she's like whenever she the thing I love about her is that whenever she pops up, something's about to go down.
Yeah.
Like she's not gonna be like shooting laser beams and like flipping cars and stuff, but she might as well be because something of that nature is happening. If Colonel Capshaw, we're now General Capshaw. I think she got promoted or something like that. And yes, Brigadier General Capshaw now. There you go. Yeah, right. Making big moves.
Yeah.
But yeah. So and like you said, that's such a cool thing that it's not a common thing anymore that books actually take the time to set up what was before, especially something like this where it's not a continuation of any other book. It's just like this is it. You get these 4 issues. You don't need to really read anything else. Like you said, the introduction is on point. I mean, it's just rock solid. It's how it's the structure of it before you even get to the meat and potatoes of the actual story.
Yeah, I think like Valiant knows what they're doing with this book. It's called The Valiant. Like, if you're gonna start somewhere, this was my introduction to Valiant comics because my shop, Ground Zero Comics, they're huge promoters of Valiant. They're big fans, and I just asked the question, how do I start? And this was the book they handed me. The Valiant. It's pretty simple, just start here. And that's why I love so much about the introduction pages. It kind of puts forward these characters and gives you a description so that when you see them in the book, they're not foreign to you, even though fans coming into it are just excited to see them all together. Like when I opened this book, I had no idea what I was getting into. I just knew it was a good primer for the Valiant universe. And it's so good in that. I think it was just an amazing introduction because of that.
Yeah, and one thing I like about this too is that not only does it do a great job of framing like the universe as a whole in just 4 issues, but they also find ways that each character plays a pivotal part. They're not just slapped in there. Like when the Geomancer's talking to Armstrong early on, and she's just going over, it's like, yeah, she's kind of venting about her life, but it also plays 2 roles because she's also explaining what the Geomancer is, who she is, how she got to this point, the significance of Armstrong and Glad. And it's just very skillfully done the way they use those little moments to just color all the elements of the book and not just like, yeah, you'll figure it out as you go, or just downplay that each character brings something special to it.
I think there's a lot of moments like that are great that once again kind of serve that purpose of introducing you to these characters and what they're all about. Like when Neville's talking to Bloodshot and he explains like the Project Rising Spirit, and he's like, you remember those guys and like what they did to you and all of that. It's like like obviously, but for somebody like me who had never read Valiant at the time, I was like, oh, what's this? And it worked really well on that level.
Yeah, and that's a good thing too. Like just like you said, there's that one subtle hint. You're like, okay, well, who's Project Rising Spirit? And then once you dig into it, you're like, crap. There's like Harbinger, and then Harbinger Wars, and Imperium, and Life and Death of Toyo Harada. There's like and then obviously Bloodshot himself. There's just like, you know what I'm saying? It like just opens a floodgate.
Yeah. Just cool stuff. I think it does that so well all throughout with all of these characters that you're introduced to. There's these little tidbits of information that you're like, what is this? And when you start digging into them, it just opens up that universe.
Yeah. And another thing too that I thought was really cool is when all right, like going back to the Armstrong and Kay, it's like in that one scene, which I'll just give you a quick little look at it, but let me find it real quick. While Kay McHenry, who's the current Geomancer, is kind of just going on about her life.
Yeah.
So you get a few pages, and you're like, okay, like she's clearly, at like some kind of therapeutic session, just chilling, and then it's revealed that she's talking to Armstrong. Yeah. And he's just like, bruh. And the cool thing about it, is you get like in just this one page, really 4 panels, well, 5 panels, really. You understand who Armstrong is as a character, but he also does a good job in explaining like almost foreshadowing who the Eternal Warrior is and how he's going to interact, not just with Kay McHenry, but the immortal enemy, as you get along in the story. And so it's little stuff like that where it's like, man, like, you can't come up with something that well structured by accident. Like and I think this is a thing that, just generally speaking, Valiant excels at more so than any other company, is that you can tell when a writer is on a book that they truly care about because of things like those little nuances like that. And that's what makes it so, like let's be real, Valiant fans are very passionate, okay? And for better or for worse. And I'm down with that. It's part of the appeal, really. And it's things like that that warrants that you're like, okay, I get why the people who, if you're an outsider looking in, you're like, okay, I get why Valiant fans are so diehard, because when you put together something like this, like if it was from, well, all right, how do I phrase this without throwing too much shade? All right, so if you have a company-wide crossover for superhero comics, the usual is that it's really not going to matter like what characters are really in it. It's just going to be like half heroes fighting heroes. Either there'll be some melodramatic ending, or there'll be some surprise bad guy. They'll beat him up, and then that'll be the status quo changes. But then really, like a week later, it's right back to normal. Yeah. Whereas, and on top of that, you got to buy like 4 billion books. Okay. The tie-ins, dude. There's so many tie-ins. But Valiant took all of what a crossover aims to be and just condenses it down to the nitty-gritty, puts it in 4 extremely well-crafted issues, and just says, hey, if you already know who all these guys are, we got something great you'll love. If you have no idea what you're getting into, we got something you're gonna love. And you just don't get that every day from just anywhere. So I think that it's one of the things that just on that element alone, like, really warrants us doing an episode on this book. But you gotta read it. I actually think go ahead.
I think this is also a book that, at this time when everybody's stuck at home looking for stuff to read, I've had a few people come up and ask like how to get into Valiant comics, and I think this is the book to point to. I think if there's any way to get people to jump into Valiant, it's going to be through this book. To me, I think this is like, I can't really think of anyone better. I know people are biased towards certain ones. Like, of course, I'm always going to recommend Ninjak, but if I'm stuck with one, I think this book just does everything for me. And I think it's important to do an episode on this book because of that, because to me, it's the recommendation for Valiant comics right now. I mean, Valiant's in a big year where a lot of people are looking at them because of the Bloodshot movie. Valiant 2020's got a lot of classic characters coming back and big series happening. And I still think this is a great way to get to know all of these characters. Like, it's a great introduction into the world that they kind of thrive in, even though, we don't have all of them. Ninjak isn't there. Punk Mambo makes an appearance at one point. I know there's a spread where Punk Mambo's in the bag. They do some things like that, but I think it's just the introduction into the world. And I think, us doing an episode on it just to kind of emphasize the importance of it in the Valiant universe, and that it's this crossover that brings everything, like you said, for people who have known these characters or who have, like I was when I first jumped into it, had no idea what I was getting into. I think it does all of those things so well.
Yeah. And another thing too I really like about this is that the immortal enemy hadn't really been seen outside of this book. And it being a new creation, that's another thing that usually is kind of a slippery slope when you make up like a bad guy of the week thing for an event. But I think what's so great about the immortal enemy is that not only is it cool to get more insight on what the Eternal Warrior and the Geomancer are about, and to see something expand on their mythos, but they do a very, 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 very good job of explaining, and not even so much, it's very much a show and don't tell kind of situation where they don't really have to talk too much
Yeah.
about why he's so dangerous. They do an extremely good job of just showing you, like,
Mm.
yeah, when the immortal enemy comes into town, you got to round up the posse because you know you're not gonna pull no. This isn't like, I don't know, Dragon Ball Z or something where Goku's just gonna pull something random out of his butt and then it's gonna be over in 2 minutes. Like,
Yeah.
you know, you're gonna go 12 rounds. You know, I
Yeah.
mean, I think like you mentioned, Punk Mambo is in there. Like in the very opening conflict, Ninjak and Galad, they get whooped. Like
Yeah.
they get trounced pretty convincingly. And
Yeah.
then, Bloodshot's in the mix. Exo Man of War gets yanked out of space to get involved. Archer and Armstrong, like I mentioned before, Quantum and Woody. So it's like it feels exactly like what it is, and it's an all hands on deck
Yeah.
situation because it's like otherwise this ship is going down.
Yeah. It's true. And I think what I really loved with the immortal enemy is their powers are essentially to reflect whoever they're fighting their greatest fears. So
Mhm.
while they're taking them on, they're having to confront their greatest fears. And as an introduction to these characters, what better way to explore that other dynamic with them other than to, kind of bring their mortal enemy or their mortal fears right to the forefront? I think you get that with
Exactly.
a lot of different characters, and it kind of sheds light on who they are, even when they're just supposed to be fighting and punching up baddies. I think it was
Hmm.
really cool writing to be able to reflect more of these character stories in this. And even though it's tied together in this crossover event of fighting, like you said, this, villain of the week or something, they were able to do it in a way that kind of broadened the characters and gave them depth. And when I jumped into another character, it also brought context to them.
Yeah, that's one thing I really loved is that, like, say for example, when the immortal enemy gets in like Ninjak's head and he starts seeing like visions of his mother, but it's like, creepy and very like old school Japanese
Yeah,
watercolor painting and stuff. Like,
yeah,
if you don't really know a lot about Ninjak, it's very easy to assume he's just like, like the Valiant Batman, I guess, for
mhm,
for lack of a better way to put that.
yeah,
Um, so like just with that little insight, you're like, okay, there's something more going on than just a British dude with swords, you
right,
know? And they do that well for just like everybody. And
yeah,
then even just all right, so say like going back to Kay McHenry, like where her and Bloodshot, right? Like while everybody else is busy taking on the immortal enemy, in a physical conflict, the two of them are kind of like almost playing like a Left 4 Dead situation where they're like trapped in a mall. You know what I mean?
yeah, yeah,
And the personal moments between the two of them
yeah,
is phenomenal, just because it really goes to show how much you can do with very little. Bloodshot barely. I mean, you could probably fill a paragraph with all of the dialogue he had
mhm,
during those scenes, that parts in most of these issues. But
yeah,
at the same time, you get such a deeper understanding of who he is and how he came to be, and like the whole, is he really Ray Garrison? He
yeah,
doesn't know. Does he have a family out there? He don't freaking know. So there's a
yeah,
lot of things that in
yeah.
just small doses, just it could become such a much bigger thing.
Yeah, I like Bloodshot being Kay's White Knight still every time just like gets me right in the heart
Yeah.
because like that, yeah, they have such an emotional beat to them that I didn't really see coming because expect Bloodshot to just bring all the action, lots of guns and blood and all that stuff, but then there
Hmm.
are these moments with him and Kay where it's like, I'm kind of like I'm really here for this, like with what they're exploring in their own sense of humanity and what they're bringing, and it really sets up that ending. That's for sure.
Yeah, and well, you know what? I gotta. There's one in particular. I had this in my mind. I gotta yank this up real quick. One scene that I love where the two of them are kind of trying to explain like who they are to each other, like how they got into this situation,
Yeah.
and she's like, like what are you, because with her power, she can tell that he's not all human. So
Yeah.
she's trying to figure out like what his deal is. And she's like, so what are you, like a robot or something? And she's like, no. And he's like, okay, well, hold on. Here we go. And she's like, okay, so you're like a cyborg? And he says, not really. It's hard to explain. And like one thing I love is like the genuine look of concern on her face here.
Yeah.
When she's like, you can't explain who you are. And he's like, explain what a geomancer is. And she's just like, all right, point taken. You know, and it's like, it's a great moment because there's like a little bit of humor, but at the same time, it's not enough to distract you from how like there's like a somberness between the two of them because they're two people who are put in these extraordinary positions that, you know, like Ray Garrison, just being like the average soldier, you don't think that one day you're going to wake up and you're going to be an unkillable monster, you know? Like, you know, with Kay McHenry, you know, she was like a PR publicist, or, you know?
Okay,
So
yeah.
like one of those like Paris Hilton wasn't drunk when she crashed her car people. And then now it's like, guess what? You are the chosen one to defend the earth. So it's such a situation. So it's great to see that, you know, Matt Kent and Jeff Lemire kind of acknowledge how outlandish their situations are and humanize it in a way that doesn't diminish the more fantastic elements of it. It's, you know, it's just great. It's just really, really good writing.
It really is. It's just solid writing, and then you got Paolo Rivera and Joe Rivera. The artwork in this thing is just crazy good. I think it's just like it'll stand the test of time. You know, I mean, you can look at this book in 20 years and still be like, that's quality work. And
yeah,
like I loved everything about it. And you know, the visuals are going to change throughout the Valiant universe and everything, but these are just solid core depictions of these characters that you can kind of carry with you. You know, and Bloodshot's just iconic in this one, from getting his arm ripped off to the awesome cover of the eye missing and bleeding down his face. You know, it's so instantly recognizable, really. And I think this book captures like all of those elements, just everything you want like that. It's quick too, you know, 4 issues long. It's something you can dive into really quick and get a lot out of it in a short period of time.
Yeah, and the cool thing about that is, and it didn't really hit me until today, after I went over another read of it. You know, I was just like taking out the trash or whatever, and I was like, man, like I knocked that book out pretty quick. But then I thought about how many times I've read it over the years, and you would think that something that you can sit down and easily just like kill in one sitting and just like kind of ruminate on it for a while after, but you know, still going about your day, wouldn't be something that would have so much substance.
Yeah.
You know, like it's the fact that I've read the same story, these same 4 issues, like over a dozen times, and every time it's like it feels like you're reading it for the first time. And there's not a lot of books that can do that sort of connection, that sort of, you know, magic without having to have like a bunch of buildup and a bunch of tie-ins and all these other things that gets you to that point. The only thing that let me think of something that'd be a good comparison. All right, let's say like Infinite Crisis, right?
Mm.
Infinite Crisis from DC Comics is one of those stories where you can, if you followed the journey and you read like Project OMAC and Shadow Pact and like there's like dozens of books that went into making the actual Infinite Crisis, and it's 7 issues. You can read all 7 and they're great. If you read all that other stuff building up to it and you really get everything that's happening in those 7 issues, you can just read that 7 issues and it's like all those other things come to remembrance. So it's like it's still fresh and exciting or whatever. But you had to put like a year's worth of work into this one book to get to that point, and Valiant's just like, nah, bro. Here's 4 issues right here. You know how much this bad boy's gonna cost you? Hold on, let me get it in the shot. $9.99, and that's it. Like you're just gonna you're gonna break it 20. You know. And you're gonna have gold. That never.
It really is, and I think that's like a selling point in Valiant too. You know, you're gonna pick up this much depth for $10, and
Yeah, you can't like you're not gonna just find that just out in the wild, you know?
No, no, it's true. And like for people who have kind of been, maybe intimidated about Valiant and them being this interconnected universe with all this lore behind it that you need to catch up and read on, like this is it. Like this is the book to pick up with when you don't have any other Valiant comics. Like this is the first one you can add to your library, and it will kick you off something just great, and it'll give you direction in where you want to go, because you're going to find that character. Maybe it's
Mhm.
Armstrong, maybe it's Ninjak or Bloodshot that you're like, oh, I got to see more of this. Special shout out to Livewire, who has like a couple of pages, I think,
Yeah.
that is just like, who is Livewire? So it does that so well that I think that's well worth it, adding to anybody's library.
Yeah, and the funny thing about that too is even after you've read it like a time or two, when you go back and read it again, if there's still spaces that you haven't explored, like for example, how you mentioned Livewire, um, Unity was a book that I was like, well, I'll just wait for it to come out in trade, and I'll just pick it up like in issues, or not in issues, but in trade as opposed to single issues. So whenever I read like the Valiant, that's a thing where it's like, hey, remember how dope Unity is too? So it's like,
Yeah.
I'm gonna go over and just start just knocking them out. And then now, when you read it, Livewire has a solo book, so you want to read that.
Yep.
This time seeing Punk Mambo throwing around Molotov cocktails, I'm probably gonna end up reading. I'm probably gonna end up reading some Punk Mambo before the night's over. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It plants the seed in your mind of like the desire to explore characters you never have, but also, hey, yeah, look at how awesome they are in here. Remember how dope they were in X, Y, and Z. Like it's I dare you to read this book and know what like Wrath of the Eternal Emperor was, or Eternal Warrior was. Eternal Emperor is a whole different other thing, but Wrath of the Eternal Warrior, and have both, and not and be able to fight the urge to immediately go read it and just be like, all right, I need more Eternal Warrior in my life, or
Yeah.
even Fallen World, or anything else that he's been in. Incursion, which we might have to do an episode on that one, but
Oh yeah.
foreshadowing. But it's just there's so much that comes out of just these four
Yeah.
issues, and it's just great. Going back to the story, the other thing too
Yeah.
is that there's a very there's weight to it. Like going by the time you finish all four issues, you like for one, you have some solid attachment to well, let's see. I guess we should probably kind of keep it a little bit spoiler free.
Just maybe
So
the cliffhanger ending, because I'd hate to ruin that for anybody. Because
yeah, I'm not gonna. All right, so I'm gonna leave that part out. But
man,
okay, but
it's years
here's
old now. Like, when did this come out? In 2014, I think issue one dropped, and I'm still not wanting to spoil that ending.
yeah,
Uh,
it's not good.
it is. Oh my god, it's so
But
good.
like by the time you get to the end, you have like a solid connection to all these characters. All right, one thing that we can get into that won't really spoil anything is Bloodshot Reborn, man.
Yeah,
Like that is a phenomenal series that spins out of this because of some of the interaction that happens between Bloodshot and Kay McHenry. Um, let's see what else is another one. Even just like Ninjak's solo book or Ninja
mhm.
K now, you know, or like say Volume 6, like Fist and or no, Volume 6 is I'll get into that in a second, but like the Fist and the Steel one where Ninjak and Eternal Warrior are teaming up, and then going forward into stories like the Coalition. This book was written, like you said, 2014, and all these years later it's still like the gift that keeps on giving, because the out like the way it's structured, it will never not have like that spider web effect,
Yeah,
you
definitely.
know
Yeah, there's a ripple to it in the Valiant universe that the book, like you said, carries weight. It doesn't feel like a throwaway crossover that is just casual reading or something. It
hmm
can really like set you off on this rabbit hole in Valiant if you haven't like followed through with it. This is the gateway right here, and I think it works so well because the creative team knew that's what they were doing. I mean, I don't think that it's any coincidence that the the immortal enemy is a reflection of these characters' fears to help show who they are, what they're against. I don't
Hmm.
think that it's a coincidence that the introductions to them follow through like they do, where each one gets kind of a few pages and then it's on to the next one. And the way it works like that, I think the way that they structured it and the way they present it to readers, it flows so well and it handles all of the characters so well in the universe that you can kind of walk away from it with a pretty concrete understanding of, how the Valiant universe almost operates
Yeah.
and how these characters can be brought together. And when you jump into an individual run, you almost can't look for, or you're almost excited for, that to happen again. And
Hmm.
what they're going to do when they come together. This book sent me off on my ninja spree, and it was hard not to. I mean, I think it's issue 2 that he comes in, and I was just sold, just couldn't get away from it. But
Yeah.
it actually made me go back and read Straczynski's Bloodshot run, because I thought Bloodshot wouldn't be a character I'd be into, because military stuff and lots of guns and all that. I'm here for ninjas and swords. And it, like, I read this book and his relationship with Kay, I was like, holy shit. Like, this is not what I thought Bloodshot was about. There's this emotional core to Bloodshot that I had no idea was there. And like, of all things to pull out of this book, that's not what you think you're gonna get whenever this is the cover. Like, it's like, that's not it does so many things like that where you're just like, oh, and it kind of sends you off on that, like I said, that rabbit hole of Valiant.
Yeah. And I honestly, I couldn't put it better myself. There's just so many things that, well, and then another thing too, going back to the Immortal Enemy, one thing that I love is how do I say this without revealing anything? Okay, so how they leave off with him in the book is great because it leaves potential for, I don't want to say a sequel, but all right, I'm just gonna leave it at that.
I mean,
That's never mind. If you,
the
you're gonna
Valiant
have to read it
2.
for yourself. You're gonna have to read it for yourself, and
Yeah,
you'll see. I don't mean to like clickbait you guys there, but you'll see what I'm talking about when you read
maybe a
through it and you
little.
get to the end. Just a
Just
little
a
bit,
little. I mean, so yeah,
a
I
little
mean,
bit.
what are the chances of a Valiant sequel, like a number 2? Is that something that could even happen, do you think?
I think it could. I think it would it would have to be something that they don't just try to replicate what they
Yeah.
did with the first one. Even if, say, like the Immortal Warrior somehow was to pop up, or not the Immortal Warrior, the Immortal Enemy was to pop up somehow again. Um, I do think that they could use a similar structure, but instead tackle, make it maybe just bigger. Now that
Yeah.
Doctor Tomorrow's been introduced,
Ooh.
there's the whole idea that there's a multiverse. Um,
Yeah.
with the ending of Incursion, the dead side isn't going to be the same. You saw a little bit of how nutty that it's even for the dead side it is in
Yeah.
Doctor Mirage. So so there's definitely a lot of room to play with there. And then even if, say, like they went completely different, like Valiant 2 was like the coming of the Psylords to Earth. I could
Uh,
see that being something wild too. Like
you're waiting on
it,
that one.
look, my money's on it, man. I had a feeling that we would Shadow Man and Punk Mambo were going to do the thing. That somehow that was going to pop back up. There was going to be some, and that happened.
Yeah.
So, or it is happening. But so I'm telling you, just sidebar, when the Psylords come back to Earth, it's going to be nuts. Something crazy is going to happen. I don't know what yet,
Yeah.
but mark my words. You heard it here first on Valiant Watch. Mark the calendar. It is going to happen, and it'll be nuts. But as far as like another big crossover like this, I could definitely see it. I could see it as another way to, well, actually going back to what we talked about in, episode 9 was about Bloodshot. The Bloodshot movie 10 was with Emily Hecht. Okay, so I think it was 7 or 8 we talked about it, where all of these characters are coming back, and it's got to be for a reason. So like, what is that reason?
Yeah.
So maybe that could be what they're building up to. This could be a way to relaunch like Unity. You know, I mean, you got all the players there now. Mambo's back. Exo Man of War's back. Bloodshot is bloodier than ever. Ninjak is, you know, they've already put the gauntlet, you know, threw the gauntlet down that Ninjak will return.
Yeah.
Shadow Man, Quantum, and Woody. The only ones that are kind of missing from the forefront right now would be like Glad doesn't currently have a solo,
Yeah.
and Archer and Armstrong.
Yeah.
But aside from that, like there's no reason why say they use Archer. I mean, just like they did in the Valiant, where
Yeah.
Armstrong and Galad are the lead-ins to the next big thing. So I
Right.
mean, they it's one of those things where the formula is so good that you don't really have to do much to it in order to have something like the Valiant Part 2 or whatever they could end up calling it, and
Right.
it just be something that you're like, that's got to go on the must read list. Like it's just,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
like the original, the Valiant, I'm calling it the original, like we already know there's a sequel. The
Big
Valiant
believer
is
already.
I'm just we're just trying to be ahead of the time, man.
Yeah.
Hashtag the Valiant too. But it's already a book that's like firmly in. I think anybody who's if you're a Valiant fan or if you've read it, it's going to be in like your top 10, top 5, top 3, you know, of must reads for Valiant books, because it is just that good, from the artwork to the characterization, the impact, um, on every level of what a comic book should be. It just bam, like straight out of the park, you know. So
Yeah. No.
I wouldn't be surprised if we are talking about this book again sometime in the future, or you know, if there is something like a Valiant Part 2, or you know, obviously we'll call it something more clever than that. But I mean, I wouldn't be surprised one bit to see another thing that's like, you know, this is the launch for, you know, Volume 2 of Psylords, and like the return of Unity, and you know, whatever the case may be. But I mean,
Yeah.
it's gold, so
It
why
is.
not? You know.
Yeah.
But
It's pure gold. No,
you know,
couldn't said it better myself, really. Like it's the gold on the shelf that you can always go to for a great time. It's too cool because like of all the Valiant books, this is the one I've read the most. This is the one that I've probably like nearest to my heart. Like if we do an episode of, you know, what do you recommend? This is going to be the book I talk about, and I'll do an hour on it then too, and I'll have plenty to say about it, you know.
for sure, man, for sure. I mean, that's yeah. I don't even know where to go from there. I mean, that wraps it up. Like that's just
Yeah.
how rock solid it is. So I think that is a good place to wrap it up for today. So what we're gonna do, if you're watching, don't forget to like, subscribe, tell your friends, tell your grandma, um, share us on Facebook, Reddit, Twitter, Instagram, whatever your flavor is. Get the word out there and be back. We will have another episode for you soon. And yeah, until then, stay valiant, my friends.